Britain woke up today thinking it was business as usual. Same streets, same bills, same winter drizzle. But behind the scenes, something massive had already happened, and almost no one stopped to explain it. In the space of a year, 62,000 illegal migrants have entered Britain, and the government response hasn't been sirens or emergency briefings. It's been silence, spreadsheets, and carefully chosen words. This isn't a rumor, this isn't speculation, and it certainly isn't small. So let's strip the emotion out, sharpen the facts, and walk through exactly what's happening, why it matters, and why this story refuses to stay buried. And we start with the number that changed everything. The figure itself is staggering, and that is before context even enters the conversation. 62,000 people arriving illegally is not a marginal fluctuation or a statistical blip. It is the equivalent of a medium-sized British town appearing almost overnight, without infrastructure planning, without public consultation, and without democratic consent. This number represents confirmed crossings, registrations, and estimates compiled through official and semi-official channels, not activist speculation or tabloid exaggeration. What makes it more striking is the pace. This is not a decade-long accumulation. It is a surge concentrated into a compressed time frame, overwhelming systems designed for far smaller volumes. When governments speak of pressures, this is what they mean. Numbers moving faster than policy, faster than capacity, and far faster than public understanding. And here's the thing, numbers this large don't materialize by accident. They respond to signals. Which leads directly to what changed and why the boats kept coming. Migration flows follow incentives, not slogans. Under the current administration, enforcement mechanisms have been softened, removals slowed dramatically, and legal thresholds quietly adjusted. Detention capacity has reduced, deportation agreements remain stalled, temporary accommodation has become semi-permanent. None of this is announced with fanfare, but collectively it sends a very clear message internationally. Britain is no longer perceived as a hard destination to reach and harder to remain in. It is seen as administratively slow, legally cautious, and politically hesitant. Word spreads quickly through informal networks, traffickers, and social media channels. Once that perception sets in, numbers rise predictably. This is not ideology, it is logistics. Borders are not enforced by statements, but by outcomes. And once arrivals increase, the pressure doesn't stay at the shoreline. It moves inland, straight into everyday life. Housing is where theory collides with reality. Local authorities across Britain are being instructed to source emergency accommodation at speed, often through hotels, former student blocks, or private rentals at premium rates. This happens while housing waiting lists for British families already stretch into years. Councils are legally obliged to house arrivals, even as they warn they cannot house existing residents. The result is predictable resentment, not because people lack compassion, but because scarcity sharpens everything. When a system cannot meet demand, every new arrival becomes visible. This is not a moral failure of the public, it is a structural failure of planning. Housing stock does not expand overnight. Communities feel decisions are imposed rather than discussed. And when housing buckles, the strain spreads. Next stop, public services already running on fumes. The National Health Service, social care, education, and local support services are absorbing this surge without additional frontline capacity. GP surgeries are registering patients faster than they can recruit staff. Schools are integrating pupils with language and trauma needs without specialist funding. Mental health services are asked to stretch further while waiting lists grow longer. None of this is the fault of migrants themselves, but systems do not care about intentions, only volume. The government frames this as manageable, yet internal warnings from councils suggest otherwise. When demand consistently outpaces supply, quality drops. The public notices when appointments disappear, class sizes grow, and response times lengthen. And when services decline, trust declines with them. Which brings us to the political silence surrounding it all. What stands out most is not the policy itself, but the absence of public debate. There has been no referendum, no emergency parliamentary session, no explicit manifesto mandate explaining how tens of thousands of illegal arrivals would be accommodated and funded. Language has been carefully softened. Arrivals replaces illegal entry. Processing replaces detention. This linguistic shift is deliberate. It lowers the temperature while numbers continue rising. But voters are not oblivious. When decisions of this scale are taken quietly, people begin to suspect avoidance rather than leadership. Transparency builds legitimacy. Silence erodes it. And once people suspect they are being managed rather than informed, attention turns to the media. Mainstream coverage has been restrained, fragmented, and often buried beneath broader political narratives. Stories appear briefly, then vanish. Context is stripped. Follow-ups are rare. The result is a strange dissonance. Communities experiencing real-world impact while national conversation remains muted. This fuels alternative media, speculation, and anger. When trusted outlets appear hesitant, audiences search elsewhere. This is not about sensationalism, it is about proportionality. A figure this large demands sustained scrutiny, not a passing mention. Silence does not neutralize controversy, it amplifies it. And as coverage fractures, public opinion begins to harden. Quietly at first, then unmistakably. Polling already reflects a growing unease. Support for the government's handling of immigration has softened even among traditional backers. Crucially, this is not confined to any one demographic or region. It cuts across age, income, and political alignment. People distinguish between legal migration, humanitarian protection, and uncontrolled entry, and they expect the government to do the same. When those distinctions blur, confidence drops. This is not xenophobia, it is governance fatigue. Voters can accept difficult decisions. What they resist is ambiguity dressed as competence. And when confidence drops, elections stop feeling predictable. That's where this story becomes strategically dangerous. History shows that immigration rarely decides elections on its own, but it often accelerates dissatisfaction already present. Cost of living pressures, housing shortages, and strained services create a volatile backdrop. Immigration then becomes the visible symbol of a broader loss of control. Governments that underestimate this dynamic often do so at their peril. What begins as policy tolerance can flip rapidly into rejection. Once voters conclude that leadership is unwilling to enforce boundaries, literal or political, they look elsewhere. Not always rationally, not always constructively, but inevitably. And that inevitability is what keeps strategists awake at night. Because signals matter. Internationally, Britain's stance is being watched closely. Border policy is not isolated. It affects diplomacy, security cooperation, and trafficking routes. When enforcement weakens in one destination, pressure shifts. Smuggling networks adopt. Other countries recalibrate their own controls. Britain's current approach risks positioning it as a pressure valve rather than a partner. That has long-term consequences beyond headlines. Borders are not just lines on maps, they are commitments to predictability. And once predictability disappears, restoring it is neither quick nor cheap. Which brings us to the unavoidable conclusion. This moment is not about hostility or compassion, it is about consent. Large-scale change imposed without explanation invites resistance, regardless of intent. 62,000 illegal arrivals represent more than a statistic. They represent a choice, one made quietly, managed cautiously, and defended ambiguously. Whether the public ultimately accepts it will depend not on messaging but on outcomes. Borders delayed are not borders removed, but only if enforcement returns. Governments can postpone reckoning, but they cannot cancel it. And Britain is rapidly approaching that point. So now the question passes to you. Is this pragmatic governance in a complicated world, or a policy Britain never agreed to but is now expected to exort? Should borders be firm, flexible, or something in between? Drop your view in the comments. Like the video so this conversation doesn't vanish. Subscribe if you want news that doesn't dodge uncomfortable facts. Because when numbers get this big, silence stops being neutral.